I think the key to finding your own story is being open and viewing life as an experiment. And
Mm.
I know he said that, but I feel like I referenced that quote unquote epiphany moment. And really, it was a change in my mindset. And what it really was a change from scarcity to abundance, where instead of focusing on the fear of the thing I might be losing or leaving behind, it's being open to something better. But the only way to know if it's actually better is to go experience it. And so that would be my advice if people are like, I really want to try this thing. Don't burn your bridges. Don't go quit a really good corporate job with no plan, but you can start that process, right? To do that, you have to say yes. You have to experiment.
Welcome to 99 Humans. My name is Jeff LaCusta, curious coach and Wall Street Journal best-selling author, striving to understand how little things generate big impact.
And I'm Nadia Carta, tech executive and lifestyle coach with a mission to transform lives and corporations by kindling hearts to generate a zeal for life.
Each week, we investigate stories about the human side of leadership to re-energize your spirit and help you become a stronger leader.
Because the reality is that leadership is messy, goofy, challenging, but always human.
Thanks for spending time with us today. Let's dive in.
Well, hey, Dustin, thanks so much for joining 99 Humans. It's great to see you. We were talking a little before we hit recording, and my brother's in the Navy, but it sounds like your son is getting ready to go to Army boot camp, and you've done some solidarity workouts to kind of honor this moment. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so he leaves in 3 days now for Army boot camp, and I decided kind of on my own, just like in solidarity with him and to kind of be thoughtful of what he's doing each day, that I'm going to ruck, which is basically walking with a heavy weight on your back every day that he's at boot camp, as long as I don't, injure myself or do something silly. So he'll be rucking a lot more with a lot more weight, but at least I'll have some space to think and pray for him each day.
How are you feeling? I mean, I remember my brother went to the Naval Academy, and it was like that plebe summer when you send them off, and then there's only a few hours where you get to see the haircut and the uniform and the everything, and then they kind of go away for many months of what you know is going to be a really intense experience. And of course, I felt a ton of pride and all of that, but I can only imagine as his dad how you're feeling in this moment too.
Yeah, it's definitely a mix. My brother was in the Marine Corps. He was 6 years older than me, so I distinctly remember seeing him off at the airport
Yep.
and what that experience was like. With our son, we're actually going to meet at an armory, and his recruiter's taking him to the airport. So our last goodbye is going to be in a parking lot somewhere
Wow.
outside. Yeah, and then 10 weeks later or longer, if he takes longer, we'll hopefully get 1 weekend with him when he graduates, and then he'll go straight to 22 weeks of his technical school. So yeah, this is the first time and maybe, or last time in 7 months that we'll get a lot of time with him. So yeah, obviously there's worry and concern, and we know we're going to miss him, but at the same time, it's mostly excitement and pride. Like he's might come up as part of our leadership story today, but it's been a year of like really wrestling and formation and trying different things, trying to figure out really what he wants to be at his next phase. And we all, especially him, feel really compelled that this is it. And so we really feel like this is the right move. And so while it's difficult, I think it's part of life, right? At some point he's got to leave. He's going to do it pretty abruptly, but I think it'll be healthy.
Hard, but hopefully amazing journey. I'm sure it will be, and so much gratitude for what he's doing.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to sign up for a hard journey, and then you get some amazing experiences out of it. But we're all grateful for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, we are too. We're very proud parents here. So, and he's our oldest. So we have two daughters that don't seem to have any interest. So this is probably our only military child.
All right. Well, let's see if that's true.
Yeah. Who knows?
And Dustin, you mentioned, kind of leaving the corporate world, leading masterminds. Before we get into kind of the whole leadership story, I'd love to hear just what are you up to right now? What's keeping you busy?
Yeah, so I run a company called Seven Figure Leap. So I started some form of this about 6 years ago when I left an engineering career behind, and so I lead mastermind groups of various forms and functions. But the main thing I do is basically help what I call mission driven experts, which are usually solopreneurs really launching or growing their brands to seven figures, hence the Seven Figure Leap, and we do that through story. So I'm a story brand guide. I've done tons of podcasts guesting and interviews and storytelling and speaking from the stage. And I feel really convicted that people that have this deep reason why they do what they do, if we can help them tell their story better and make that the fuel for their business growth, like that's a passion of mine. So that's really what fills my days, is a lot of Zoom calls, but with really cool people. And occasionally we get to meet in person, which I'm happy to share an experience I had very recently of meeting a bunch of these people in person.
That sounds so cool. And, you know, at 99 Humans, the whole thesis behind this experiment that we're running is that leaders are people too, which seems obvious, but it's easy to forget that and go behind the facade of big impact metrics, big decisions that sometimes make people mad, and only see kind of that leader idea. But then behind the scenes, they're scrambling like crazy. They're juggling their personal life as well. And those things are intersecting with their actual leadership role all day, every day. There is no time where they're not intersecting. And then to hear you helping these kinds of folks tell that in a story form, what makes stories so powerful for helping folks communicate?
Yeah, story is a sense-making device. I've heard that quote attributed to Roy Sutherland, who's a big British marketer. I heard it from Donald Miller, who created StoryBrand, which his whole book and company is about this topic. But it's a sense-making device, and it's really that humans are wired. Our brains are literally wired for story. So we retain or we receive information, we process information, we actually store information in story format. And so it's really in story that we're able to recall information. So, and that starts to make sense if you just think back of like the history of human civilization, and like before there was ever any written word, everything was communicated through stories and passed down in generational stories and parables. All the religious texts are basically written in stories. Jesus, if you're Christian, spoke in parables and stories, and that's all for a reason. And it's because that's just how we're made, right? And so I think story is vital, and it's also extremely powerful, for good and for evil. But we stay on the good side of that, and I think the reason it's so impactful for the people I work with is almost all of them are helping a past version of themselves. And so, in other words, hey, you're 5 years behind me in my journey, or even 6 months, and like I have empathy for that. Like I really know how that feels, and because I'm so called to help my former self, like that fuels the reason I do what I do, and therefore, like my story and telling it in a way that really connects with you is extremely valuable to you because it connects with you where you're at. So there's a lot of layers to this, but it's a biological thing, but it's also a marketing thing, right? It's also a very effective way to grow a business because of the connection it creates to another human.
I just went to the Coke Museum. I live in Atlanta here,
Oh, yeah.
and I don't know if you've ever been. I don't know if it's an incredible museum overall.
No,
but
we went to the aquarium, and we saw the museum across the parking lot, and we thought,
did the
no,
right
we're not gonna
one.
do that.
You did the right one. But they start with this video. You go kind of into a movie theater, and they play you basically an ad for Coke. But everyone in the audience is bawling afterwards because it's such like they are masters of that storytelling. And
Nostalgia.
I mean, it's a Coca-Cola ad. You're in a Coca-Cola museum, and here you are crying as this video is playing about family and all these things that have nothing to do with soda. So it speaks to me the power of stories, because I also identify in my own leadership experience that the folks who are most impactful in business and in their life are also great storytellers. So that resonates. But why then is it so hard? Because a lot of what you said was it's in our, DNA. This is the way that it's always been. But this is something it feels to me like we have to relearn and try and practice and get better at, because somewhere along the way, even though it's in our DNA, we lose the skill of storytelling, or we forget maybe how important it is and get into some of those bad habits instead. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think the real challenge, I think in general, we're pretty good at telling other people's stories. Now, we may not be like a masterful orator and like how we deliver it, but in general, if I hear about you and then I want to tell someone about you, like I'll tell a story, and it'll kind of be natural that I'll do that, like the story of how we met and what impact you had on me, but I'll tell it in a narrative way. I think the very tricky part in helping hundreds of people with this now is telling your own story. Like, telling your own story is really difficult. In large part because you can't read your own label. I would say like you're sitting in a jar, like you are in a jar. Everyone else can see you really clearly, much more clearly than you can see yourself. And then we have these, this kind of recency bias, if you will. Like, it's really hard for me to think back how I was feeling 5 years ago to be able to reach you at the point that you're at, because I'm 5 years later. But with coaching and with frameworks, I think the thing that StoryBrand does so well, and it has really helped me in this, is they just provide frameworks. It's like, fill in this box with this idea, fill in this box with this idea. And what emerges is a very compelling story that actually follows the same framework that like Star Wars and Karate Kid and Indiana Jones and every best-selling book that's ever been written, they all kind of, the hero's journey is a big part of this.
Yeah.
And so just having that framework to where it takes the pressure off, that helps a lot. And then the other thing that really helps a lot is being kind of in communion with other humans where they can speak to you about what they see. And it's not just you trying to see inside your own head and read your own label, because that's extremely difficult, nearly impossible, I would say. I think there's a few people who can do that. And so that's a big part of what we do in this mastermind experience that I try to provide. And if I may, can I talk about something that like happened literally last week? It's a really good example of this.
Please do. Yes.
Yes. So I was speaking at a conference called PodFest last week. And so it's a podcasting conference. And I thought, you know what? I've had this group called the 7-Figure Elite Mastermind. There's 15 people in it. We meet on a weekly basis. We're really become tight in helping each other grow our businesses. But of course, when you start getting to that depth, it's a lot more of it's personal, and we know each other in a pretty intimate way. But we'd never met in person. It's been on Zoom for a year. So I said, hey, let's do our first meetup. And so we ended up with 14 people. So I guess 12 of the members and 2 spouses came to Orlando. I hosted this mastermind dinner, and it was supposed to be 3 hours. It was 4.5. It was like, it was amazing. But what we did in preparation for that, and it speaks to this helping people see their own worth and story, is I asked every person to write a few lines about every other person in the group and what we see as your unique ability, right? So it's like, hey, Jeff, I've been with you for a year. I really understand your business, your drive, your passions, and what you may not be able to see, but what I see so clearly is you're really good at this, this, and this, right? Mm. And imagine getting that from 14 other people. And what's really amazing, I was the only one that got to see everything in advance. So I compiled these things and I created a document for each person. And I said, please print this out before you come to Orlando. We're going to use it. And I got immediate emails like, I'm crying. This is amazing. I feel like seen for the first time, like deep stuff. And what was amazing is that 14 people, everything was different. Some people wrote 3 words, some people wrote 3 paragraphs, but there was a definite through line in every one of them where it was like people could. And so the exercise we did when we got together was, I want you to like synthesize this and express back to us in a line or two what is your unique ability. That was what we're trying to name. What's your unique ability? And so people did that, and it was amazing. And so, that was last week. And then we had a call yesterday kind of recapping and sharing for the people that couldn't be there in person and helping them kind of go through the same exercise. It's probably one of the most powerful things I've done as a leader. Like, so grateful that we had that space and that we chose to make that the activity. Like, I think it literally will change some people's lives because they now have words for something that has been there, but they haven't been able to name it. And, so that's an example, but now they'll have that. And then like that will become part of their story because they see how other people see them in a deep way now.
That sounds incredibly powerful. And thinking back on that, kind of like you're sitting in a jar, it's hard to see your own label. Sounds almost like part of helping you break out of that jar or see it is, well, you tell me what you see on my label. And you go around the group and everyone reads your label. And then you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe, that's true, but I never thought of myself in that way. What a powerful experience. Leaders are trying to create these kinds of magic moments all the time. What did you think about in the planning of this? And it probably goes back to the planning of creating the mastermind to begin with, because as you said, y'all have been, working together for quite some time, but these things don't come free. And as the leader of that group, what went into the actual planning to design an opportunity for the magic moment?
Yeah, it was really just being in tune to the themes of our conversations. So we do a lot of hot seat sessions, which basically means, hey, I'm Dustin. I'm having this like usually business, right? I'm stuck with this offer, with this marketing thing's not working. I really need help because I got to create this presentation next week. And so someone will be in a kind of a spotlight and we speak into them and help them. And it just started happening towards the end of last year numerous people were bringing up this idea of unique ability. And and we also use a lot of Dan Sullivan's frameworks. He has a company called Strategic Coach, and this term comes from him, this unique ability. I'm sure it predates him, but he uses it. And so it's just like the question started getting answered, like, Cassie, someone in the group, like, I don't think you're seeing this, but like, you're really good at this thing, right? And you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole because you're focusing on the wrong thing. I think if you switched your messaging to this, and this became like a core part of your offer because you're really good at this and you've helped me with this personally, so people would, take that advice, and then they would go away and they come back and be like, it worked, like I sold out my group or whatever. And so it just kind of was a theme that was emerging. And I also think it was kind of the timing of the group, and that we'd been meeting on a regular basis for long enough now that it was like very open and transparent and vulnerable. And so, honestly, my unique ability, like the thing that they told me, when I synthesized it down in 2 words was clarity and connection. And so I'm really good at helping people get clear on like their unique ability and the things that they should offer in the marketplace. And I'm really good then of saying, and now here's who you need to know, like a very, very much a who networking connector type of person, which, leads pretty well to curating mastermind groups and running them, because my unique ability is basically what I bring to these groups. And so, anyway, I think it was just my intuition in some sense, but also just like the theme of the group was leading to that. Wow. So I don't know what, I want to meet again in the fall. I don't know. It's going to be a hard act to follow, but we'll see what emerges at that time. It might be something very different.
I want to ask how you found this, how you found this passion, because you weren't always doing that. But before we kind of leave this specific mastermind, it's called 7-Figure Lead. And I have obviously got to pick your brain on the 7-figure piece, because that aspiration attached to money, there's so much personal development, personal growth, sharing, connection, all of that. But at the end of the day, the whole name of the group is we're trying to become millionaires here. Tell me more about that. Where did that spark come from, and how does that work in reality with a group?
I love this question. And if I'm going to give the 1 minute, maybe 2 minute version here, if people want to hear the really deep version of this, I literally recently just launched my first podcast for the first time. I've been a guest forever. I finally launched my first podcast. It's called 7-Figure Leap. And the very first episode, I have a member of my mastermind group interview me about what does 7-Figure Leap mean, what values are associated with it, and we go into my past, and it's pretty deep. But
we'll put it in the show notes.
So you want to hear me cry? That's a good place.
Version, absolutely.
So we won't do that here, but so I'll break it up from 7-Figure and Leap. So 7-Figure, yes, on the nose is like, hey, I want to have $1 million business, and it is that. But I talk a lot about, I mentioned earlier, mission-driven entrepreneurs are who I specialize in working with. And those are people that have a big reason why they do what they do. They're very purpose-driven. And they do want more income. They're an entrepreneur, but they also want to have a big impact in their zone of genius. And so the 7-figure part is first about having a 7-figure impact. And so as an entrepreneur, we do measure things in revenue. But if I want to have a 7-figure impact, that will generate typically a 6-figure income. So everything's kind of a 10x relationship. So if I make $100,000 a year as an entrepreneur, if I'm doing it right, I should be generating $1 million of value for my clients overall, right? And so you don't need to be making 7 figures to qualify for the work that I do, but 6 figures means you have a 7-figure impact. And then when you do want to have a 7-figure income, you basically have an 8-figure impact, right? And so I know it sounds silly and maybe a little too simplistic, but should be a 10x relationship. So 7 figures means impact and income eventually. Most of the people that I'm working with are multiple 6 figures, but they have a vision towards 7 figures of income. Wow. But they know the way to get there is through having a bigger impact. It's not through manipulation or greed or any of that stuff, right? They're all very values based. So that's the 7-figure. And then the leap is my belief and my personal experience that you can make these 10x leaps actually very quickly, like quantum leaps in your impact and then your income through relationships. And so I literally had a 10x experience in my own coaching business from 2022 to 2023, and it 100% happened through relationships. So then the question becomes, how do you build relationships? And I think masterminds are a good way, but one of my specialties is actually helping people tell their story as podcast guests like this. And so and podcast guesting, to me, the biggest value in it There's a lot of other reasons to do it, but the biggest value in it is actually it's a tool to build relationships at scale.
Mm.
So like I'll get to know you really well. Your audience gets to know me really well. I could interact with your past guests and get to know them really well. And so if you do this strategically, it can really compound quickly and create exponential growth. So that's the leap. The idea that you can do 7 figures and you don't need to like do a linear, slow grind to get there. You just need to meet the right people.
I love that. I think just that power of networking, and oftentimes it's thought of as almost like something you're born with, right? Like, you have this skill, relationship building, or you don't.
We'll get into that now, I'm sure, but I had this is a complete new skill in the past 2 years for me. I'm not a natural networker. I'm very much an introvert.
Wow. So we can learn, we can grow, we can develop this. And it sounds like through relationships, ironically, which for some, is already like, no, thanks, I'm out. But if that's the secret sauce to 7-figure incomes, to 7, 8-figure impacts. But one thing that comes to mind, just to be honest, because while it feels right that there's like a 10x maybe difference between what you get paid and what you're actually impacting, how do you avoid feeling discouraged by that too? Because there's a little bit of me that's like, why would I not be paid what I'm worth? If I'm doing $1 million of impact to my business, my clients, shouldn't I be earning $1 million as well? There's a piece of it that's like, all right, that's the way that it is. Let me aspire. But also, what the heck? Why isn't this coming out more 1-to-1?
Yeah, and of course it's not a perfect 10x. But back in my corporate days, I was an engineer, and so I believe there the ratio is more like 3x. It's like basically if I'm paying you $50 an hour, I need to bill you out at 150, right? Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, there's a 3x multiple on that. But the best employees would actually provide much more than $150 of value to that client, right? So I still think there's a 10x relationship, but when you're an entrepreneur, it's you and the client or the end customer. When you're in corporate, there's a middle person there or a middle company there that takes a good chunk of that, and for the security and all the things that they do. So but I do think a 10x ratio is fair, and I also realize that many people I work with, it's not as easy to measure. I work with marriage coaches and health-oriented people and corporate executive consultants and stuff like that, where it's not necessarily that they're charging that the dollar amounts are going to correlate to 10x, but they're still, say a married couple, you saved their marriage, right? Like, how do you put a price tag on that? They may have paid you $1,000 for coaching, but you definitely provided at least 10,000, if not way more than that, in value. So it's really about value. When I say impact, it's about value. And so, and honestly, I think coming to terms with that and being okay with it and realizing that, I don't get the 10x, I get the 1x, and I get to give the 10x. I think that's helped me a lot because it's really created an abundance mindset, because it's also, I think the thing that we default to is like, oh, if I work this hard, if I do 1 unit of work and it creates 10x value and someone else gets to keep that, like I'm losing something. Yeah, but it actually doesn't have to be that hard to create the 10x value if you're in your unique ability and your zone of genius and you're selling through story. And so my theory is like, let's just make it easier to empower you to have the 10x impact. But don't make it like hard. It shouldn't be hard. So and of course, business is full of challenges and all those things. But anyway, that's my encouragement. There's a little bit of my philosophy.
I love it. Well, okay, so you mentioned your corporate life a few times here. I'm sitting in corporate America, and many days I absolutely love it, and other days I wonder, man, what am I doing here? Why am I sitting in corporate America?
Yeah.
So tell me your story of, how you found your path to identifying a passion and then finding an entrepreneurial way to pursue that passion.
I hope this is encouraging. I'll go quickly because it's a confusing path.
It took a lifetime to build the story. So yeah.
Exactly. So the short story is I was a civil engineer. And so I went to engineering school, got a master's degree, taught at the university, I had a specialty in traffic engineering, and was, just to not be very humble, I was really good at it. And I built a whole engineering practice with one company, and then I left there when the management got crazy. Basically did a startup within another established firm, and then for 10 years or for 7 more years, build it up again in that company. So by the time I was done with engineering, I had like 20 people working for me. I was the head of the department. So like I've been both the employee and in a sense the employer. I was a partner in the company and all that stuff. But so that was, up to 2017, I was doing full-time engineering. But also in 2019, I started my first real side hustle. And so it actually grew out of marriage ministry, and my wife and I were doing. So we were doing marriage ministry, really helping couples. And this is like the heyday of blogging and stuff. I was like, there's got to be a better way to reach these couples than church basements and stuff. And so I was on vacation, got inspired by a book I was reading by Dan Miller, and was like, you know what, I'm gonna like come home and figure out how to make a website. So I came home, figured out how to make a website, and started writing a lot about our experiences. And then I wrote a book, and then it just, my wife and I were doing some speaking. And so this marriage ministry became a marriage business, and we started having, experts come in and help, and we did digital courses and all that. So that pulled me into the entrepreneurial world for the first time. And I messed around with that kind of, part-time for 5 years. Then in like 2015, I got really deep into this digital marketing world. So I was still a full-time engineer, but I was really getting into digital marketing. I started going to conferences and doing training. And so I had about a 2-year overlap where I was doing both marketing consulting on the side and engineering, like a lot of engineering, like, and having night meetings and all this stuff for engineering. So it was a very intense couple-year period.
Could I ask a question about that period?
Please.
Because I hear that period can be critical and also can be really challenging. So I'm curious, what was it like for you? Were you just dying to jump out and be like, when this gets big enough, I'm ready to go? Or was it maybe more unexpected where it just happened to be big enough one day and the moment came? I'm curious what it was like, how much you were feeling anxious about the move.
It was a lot of pressure on me. So my wife, so we have 3 kids, and at the time she was a stay-at-home mom. So she has her own career as a special education teacher, but for 8 years she was home. Like that includes this time. So I'm the sole breadwinner, insurance, all that stuff, right? And so in 2015, I made this conscious decision at a conference. I'm like, I want to do digital marketing full time, but I have no idea when that's going to be feasible. But in the meantime, I'm going to continue to build my skills. I had my own business I was running, and I started taking on some clients, and it was more like definitely the secondary thing. And then in 2017, there was like literally like an epiphany moment. Like in the summer of 2017, I can remember vividly talking to my wife, and I was really starting to feel this pressure. Like I'd say a healthy pressure. Like I really want to do this. I still don't know how I'm going to. Like I got to make a decision at some point, right? Like I can't keep doing both, I guess is the better way to say that. At the level that I was doing it,
just for burnout reasons, I would guess.
I was very close to burnout. To burnout, and again, not to mention 3 kids and all the other stuff. But I had this moment, and it was like, oh my gosh, this isn't a permanent decision. Like I'd put all this pressure. Like I had this identity as an engineer, and I was like becoming a marketer, and I had these clients on both sides. And my big fear was like, if I do leave engineering, I can never. It's like my mind was thinking I can never go back. Like this is a fatal decision. Like this is it. I get one chance. But I had this epiphany moment where I'm like, that's not true. People like me. If like I could leave engineering for 6 months, and if I really suck at being an entrepreneur, I'll just go back. Like why am I putting so much pressure on this decision? So I was very open with my wife and my kids, and I was like, I'm going to try. I'm an engineer, so I had benchmarks and I had goals. I was like, if I get to where I want to by the end of this year in December 2017, if I have enough savings, then I'm going to tell my employer that I'm quitting. Okay. So for 6 months I said, I know I've been working hard. I'm going to go double down on that. And I'm basically going to build this war chest so that I have security if I leave, and I have to figure out the insurance. Like this is it. So like I got a 6-month runway and a very discrete decision point. And I did. I exceeded those goals. Things were going well. And I went and told my employers. I was very scared to have this discussion. And the wild thing was like, my boss was like, very happy for you. Actually, I'm a president of the Engineers Club. Would you build our website? Like they became my first client. I'm like, okay. And then they said, why don't you stick around part-time as much as you want? Help us find your replacement. And I'm like, that's cool. Like I'm not, I'm used to working 80, 90 hours. Like this is no problem. So I ended up staying there a while. It was a super easy transition. I ended up replacing my full-time salary really quickly, in part with, a client that they gave me. So it was so funny that the build up to this moment, like January 3rd, 2018 is actually when I gave this notice. And so that was obviously a huge inflection point in this journey. So any questions about that? And I'll just zoom into how I got into what I'm doing now.
Well, I mean, congratulations, first off, from 2018 to what you're doing now. It sounds like not only have you proven this to be a successful pursuit, but you've tacked on so many other areas and passions and things that make it even more fun and interesting as you grow.
It gets way weirder. So
Tell me
I
before, I want to hear the weird, but you mentioned an epiphany moment where there was fear that was kind of keeping you from doing something. And then there was a moment, and it sounds a little magical the way you described it. What for some, and actually as a coach, when folks mention a fear, I think coaches are trained to go immediately to the fear. And it sounds like you did that a little bit, where basically you were describing for yourself, okay, I think this is going to be the scariest thing ever for these reasons, but that isn't true. And here's why. So you really went to the fear to prove it wrong yourself, which sounds like self-coaching. But I'm curious if there were other things, because I do think it's fear often that are keeping people from doing things that they want. How do you get an epiphany moment? Like, other than just hoping an epiphany comes, what any tactics or ideas for folks?
I mean, I remember sharing the epiphany moment with my wife and be like, hey, this kind of hit me today. And I honestly don't remember how it came to me, and it's really not that profound. But it seems very obvious, but it wasn't to me at the time. And so
not when you're in it. I agree.
was like on a long walk, and it was just like I was kind of wrestling with this. Like, I gotta, pee or get off the pot. Like, I gotta make a decision. And I think what it really was like a fear of losing my identity. I up until maybe a year ago, I still would say I used to be an engineer and now I do this. Like, there was still this identity, this like a bit of pride, like, oh, if I'm an engineer, people think I'm smart. And like, do I give all that up for the second career when people are going to look at me and think I'm an idiot? Like, you like have a really good salary, you're at the top of the game, you seem to be really good at what you do. Why would you throw all that away and then go, basically do random marketing for people? Because at that time, I didn't even know exactly what I wanted to do. I was just taking on any marketing. So I was building websites, doing Facebook ads. I mean, I was learning a lot. And people were trusting me. A lot of local businesses that is where I actually started with this. So, yeah, I think for me I think my number one advice for people, and this feeds out of my epiphany moment, when people are like, "What do you tell a young entrepreneur, or what do you tell someone in a corporate who's like, I think I want to try something else?" I always say, like, with very few exceptions in life, hopefully marriage, religious vocation, being a parent, there's very few permanent decisions. Right. And so you don't need to put that much pressure on this. You want to prepare and be wise about how you're going about it. But that was the epiphany for me. Like, this is not a permanent decision. I love how you introduced 99 Humans. Life is a series of experiments. And so for right now, I'm trying this. I have no attachment to the outcome. Now, I can talk about that now and the maturity I've gained and doing this for numerous years and helping other people with it. But at the time, I didn't have that. Right. And so I don't know where it came from. It's not that profound, but now it's a passion of mine to say that to people and like, hey, because people get so stuck even on like seemingly minor decisions. And I'm like, just try it. If it doesn't work, like, don't burn your bridges, and you should be able to, you'll be fine. So
it can seem so obvious from the outside looking in, but when you're in it, it's like all consuming, blocker, as you said. All right. You mentioned it gets weirder. Let's get weird.
Let's get weird. So 2018, I have this random portfolio of marketing clients, some online, some in person, local. Well, one of the guys I end up having as a client is a local butcher shop. And so he owns 2 locations. He's opening a third. He's a third generation owner of this business, and he's about my age, a little bit younger. And so we start working together, and I'm helping him build his local business, and we built a really good relationship. And one day he's like, hey man, do you know how to sell stuff online? I'm like, yes, I do. I have another online business. I said, I've never sold a physical thing, but figure it out. And so I ended up, he had a brand called Fire Creek Snacks. And so it's basically a better for you healthy meat stick, like a hickory smoked meat stick. But I really liked his logo and his brand. And I was drawn to it the first time I ever saw it. I didn't know that the butcher shop owner and the brand were from the same person.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, let me try. So I literally worked for free. I built a Shopify store. I said, let's try to sell this. And we started selling it to the email list that I had created from his butcher shop. And it just kind of started getting some momentum. One thing led to another. I ended up becoming a partner in that brand. I still am, which pulled me into a whole different world. So I learned all the e-commerce and like selling on Shopify. And then January in 2019, so about a year into this relationship, he's like, hey, you want to come with me to Orlando? I want to go to the PGA merchandise show, like basically the golf trade show. He'd never been to a trade show. I'd never been to a trade show. I had no idea what to expect. Ironically, it was 5 years to the day I was in that trade show that I was at PodFest hosting the mastermind dinner that I referenced from last week. So literally 5 days to the day, I had been in Orlando for a Fire Creek trade show for the first time. And 5 years later, I'm hosting my own mastermind in Orlando,
cool.
like within eyesight of that convention center. It was interesting.
Full circle.
Full circle. Yeah. So I ended up going to a dozen trade shows in 2019. So I traveled quite a bit.
Wow.
The worst thing for me as an introvert, like literally standing and like hawking meat, like put our meat in your mouth, like saying silly stuff to get people to come over and letting them sample, and we'd sell purchase orders. So, but I learned a ton about marketing, people, sales. So everything is kind of going well. I had some really solid marketing clients. I was getting some income from Fire Creek. I was driving from St. Louis, where I live, to Chicago, March 2020, and I got
Getting
to a
close.
hardware trade show. Yeah, and they said trade show's canceled, and I'm like, that's weird. So I go back home, lose 80% of my clients because they were local businesses that were shut down in the state of Illinois, and yeah, so that was not a fun time. So I had a really dark period of uncertainty between like March and, like a lot of people did, May 2020. But the silver lining is I said, what can we do to grow Fire Creek? I can't travel. I can't sample podcast. And so I went and pitched and got on my first podcast as a guest. Wow. So I got on a business show, telling the business story of Fire Creek and this partnership that we had. It went really well. And we sold some meat sticks. And so I went on some more and I went on some more. So second half of 2020 was me doing podcast guesting for my own brand. And in January 2021, someone reached out to me and he said, hey, can I pay you to coach me on how you're doing this? I was like, sure. So first podcast guest was 2020. First coaching client was 2021. I ended up having about 20 clients that year. They were all like, they had heard me. They started hearing my story. There was referrals, but I was doing it all one-on-one and like figuring it out. And some of my marketing clients came back. And so, it was a busy year, but it was a very good year after the horrible year of 2020. And so in 2022, I was like, you know what? This is a system. Like I keep teaching the same thing now to all these individual people. So I started a small group and I taught all the people at the same time. And I was like, this is really fun. But it was still like what I would call group coaching. It was me teaching and they could ask me some questions, but it was not a mastermind. I didn't know what a mastermind was. April 2022, I jump into my first mastermind. I spent a ton of money on it. It was actually not a very good mastermind at all. I did not get an ROI. But it did a lot of things to me if I look at it like a victim, but it also did a ton of stuff for me. And it gave me, I had a couple key relationships, people that are literally in my mastermind now I met there. It also showed me some good stuff. And it also showed me, most importantly, I think, how I don't want to show up and how I don't want to make people feel. And so I took that, wrestled with it. It was a very intense summer of 2022, I made this huge financial investment. Things weren't really working. I was still actually doing some engineering contract work because coming out of COVID, that was they threw me an olive branch. It's like, we have work if you want to take it. And I was like, yes, I need to pay my bills. And because I'd lost a lot of my marketing revenue. Yep. So August 2022, I said, all right, I'm really done with engineering. So I said, I'm cutting off that. I'm changing my role at Fire Creek, and what I'm going to do is focus on launching my own mastermind, combining all this podcast guesting knowledge, my 14 years of digital marketing experience, and started like hand-to-hand selling, basically like inviting people into it. And so September 2022, launched my very first mastermind group called the Podcast Profits Accelerator. It's like a 90-day experience. And then I'm on my 7th sold out 90-day cohort. And the person that introduced me to 99 Humans is Adam Coelho, who's a former guest on here. He was in one of them. And so, so I've met like the most amazing people. You fast forward to now, it's like I've got that. And then the people that finish those 90-day cohorts, a few of them will want to continue on. And that's what the 7-Figure Leap Mastermind is. It's like, that's my continuous mastermind with kind of not the best of the best, but the people who are really committed and love the experience and they want to continue on. So that gets you from engineering, marriage, marketing, meat sticks, and now masterminds. So.
Wow.
I told you it was weird.
Congratulations. And it is definitely inspirational.
Well, thank you.
One thing that really sticks out to me is I think you said yes 15 times. And And that openness to meat sticks, to the butcher, before you were there, to e-commerce, to First Mastermind, to, trade shows. It's amazing just how open you've been to the opportunities and experiences. Now, of course, you're working your butt off
Yeah.
to get in front of, the chance to have opportunity.
Right.
But tell me, just we're kind of reaching the end here,
Right.
but how do you balance saying yes and staying the course, maybe in quotes, if there's such a thing?
It's a great question. I'd say the part I've struggled with, whether you want to talk about leadership or entrepreneurship, is saying yes to too many things at the same time. And so, having multiple businesses at the same time and launching new offers while I'm still figuring out the previous offer and stuff like that. So part of being an entrepreneur is saying yes and seeing opportunity. I mentioned that epiphany moment that's continued on, like that idea that I can try this. I'm not married to it. It may not work. It may work. I don't know. But like, I'm willing to try things. But what I've gotten better at, I would say in the past couple of years, is a maturity with it. Because actually decide is actually the root of it is to kill. It's like, so if you decide like to do something, you're actually deciding not to do other things. And so what I've been able to do now, when I say yes to something, I realize I have to cut something else out. Right. And so like I currently still own Engaged Marriage. It's a very original marriage business. It's kind of just sitting there, not really doing much. It's passive, but it needs more attention. And I'm still a partner in Fire Creek Snacks. Yeah. Although there's been an agreement made that I don't want to be, so this year I'm actually looking to sell both those businesses. I can't do that overnight, but I've realized like I got to let those go to continue to go deeper in the 7-figure leap and this storytelling and this thing I'm really passionate about. Because I found, seemingly by accident, but by the series of yeses, I found my unique ability is actually curating and leading mastermind experiences. Ironically, I didn't know what that word meant in 2022. And I'm sitting here, a couple years later, I'm a specialist in podcast guesting. I lead mastermind groups. None of this existed, or I had no awareness of it. So yeah, in hindsight, it kind of makes sense. Like, oh, like this led to this, led to this, led to this. And what I didn't get into, because you wouldn't know any of these people anyway, is it's really the relationships that I built along the way. I kind of mentioned like in the bad mastermind, I have 2 people that are in my best mastermind. Like I met them there, right? And they've been on this journey with me, and they've helped me so much. And so it's really about the people along all these stops that have made all the difference for me.
It does not sound like an accident at all. I mean, you've been peeling back your own onion over and over, and you're finding more of that core as you go, which is so inspiring to hear.
Well, thank you.
Well, Dustin, I so appreciate you coming on 99 Humans. As you reflect on our conversation, kind of always ask all of our guests, what main takeaway do you want to leave people who maybe are inspired by your story for sure, but thinking about how do they tell their story and find their own story, but maybe before they can then tell it as you have?
Yeah, I think the key to finding your own story is being open and viewing life as an experiment. And I know I kind of already said that, but I feel like I referenced that quote unquote epiphany moment, and really it was a change in my mindset. And what it really was a change from scarcity to abundance, where instead of focusing on the fear of the thing I might be losing or leaving behind, it's being open to something better. But the only way to know if it's actually better is to go experience it. And so that would be my advice. If people are like, I really want to try this thing, like, don't burn your bridges. You don't go like quit a really good corporate job with no plan, but you can start that process. Right. And so, to do that, you have to say yes. So you have to experiment. And the other thing I've learned in this experience is there's so many people who would love to help you. Some for free, some through the books they've written, some through, paid coaching and things like that. But there are resources. You're not alone. And like, you can go find people who, like, their mission is to help people like you. Right. And I think that's really powerful. And it's only a question away. Like, start asking people, you know anyone who could help me with this? And who, not how mentality will take you places really fast. It'll give you those quantum leaps.
Ooh, that's a good nugget there. The who, not how mentality. Okay. For folks who want to connect with you, where can they find you? Your podcast, Mastermind, 7-Figure Leap. Where can folks find you?
7figureleap.com. So pretty simple. I usually spell it with a number, but I think either version will get you there. So yeah, 7figureleap.com. The podcast is, if you just look up 7-Figure Leap, you'll find that. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if people are on LinkedIn, look up Dustin Riechmann, which is only one of me, Riech. And I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes. And again, thank you, Dustin. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot. I've been taking notes as we go, and I find it so inspiring. So really appreciate you sharing your story.
Well, I appreciate you, Jeff. I love the format. It's very, very fun to unpack this in this way. It's probably the only time I've unpacked it specifically like this. So this is a lot of fun. So thanks for the opportunity.
Of course. Well, we'll be in touch. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.
See you, Jeff.
Bye.